The topic of this screencast is the large intestine. You may find information on the large intestine in Chapter 14 of your textbook. This screencast was designed to achieve the following objectives. Describe the gross anatomy of the large intestine. Describe the wall of the large intestine. Describe the functions of the large intestine. Describe the role of bacteria in the large intestine. Explain the propulsion of residue through the large intestine. Describe the defecation reflex, and finally, describe diarrhea and constipation. The large intestine extends from the ileocecal valve, where it forms a junction with the ileum of the small intestine, to the distal end of the anal canal. The large intestine is so named not because it is longer than the small intestine, which it is not, but because it is larger in diameter than the small intestine. The large intestine frames three sides of the abdomen, with the small intestines located in the center. The first part of the large intestine is the colon, and it represents 90% of the large intestine. The colon is divided into 5 regions. Starting at the ileocecal valve, they are the cecum, and attached to the cecum is the vermiform appendix, vermiform meaning worm-like for obvious reasons. The ascending colon extends vertically up the right side of the abdomen. Right beneath the liver, the colon turns and extends across the body as the transverse colon, and then it turns again and extends vertically down the left side of the body as the descending colon. In the lower left quadrant of the abdomen, the colon then forms the S-shaped sigmoid colon, sigmoid meaning S-shaped. Those are the 5 portions of the colon. The next portion of the large intestine include the rectum and the anal canal. Rectum means straight, and both the rectum and the anal canal are straight, and they lie at the midline of the body. I also want to point out that all of the large intestine is found in the abdominal cavity, with the exception of the sigmoid colon, the rectum, and the anal canal, which are actually found in the pelvic cavity. Now let's examine the wall of the large intestine. The mucosa contains these tube-like crypts with simple columnar cells and lots of goblet cells. The goblet cells produce mucus to ensure smooth passage of the feces through the colon. Few enzyme or hormone secreting cells are present, as the main function of the large intestine is the absorption of water, not digestion. In the anus, the mucosa contains stratified squamous epithelium. This is the same type of tissue that is found in the mouth and the pharynx and the esophagus. Stratified squamous epithelium is necessary to withstand the abrasion of stool passage. The submucosa of the large intestine is similar to that of the small intestine. You have your blood vessels, and you also have your lymphatic structures called Peyer's patches. If we examine the muscularis externa of the large intestine, we find that the outer longitudinal layer of the muscularis externa is reduced to 3 parallel bands called tinea coli. These tinea coli contract and shorten the colon, causing it to pucker laterally into broad, shallow sacs called haustra, which give the large intestine its characteristic knobby appearance. Now that we have discussed the anatomy of the large intestine, let's turn our attention to its functions. So residue enters the large intestine through the ileocecal valve from the small intestine, and there it will remain from 12 to 24 hours. I want to stress that no digestion occurs in the large intestine, at least no digestion catalyzed by human enzymes occurs in the large intestines. You do have some absorption of vitamins and some ions, and most of the remaining water is absorbed by the large intestines. It's important that water absorption is sufficient enough to prevent dehydration and also to maintain water balance, yet enough water must remain in the large intestine to ensure easy passage of feces. So the remaining pasty mass, which is called feces, is then delivered to the rectum, and that pasty mass consists of indigestible food, which is called fiber, mucus, a huge number of bacteria, and water to allow smooth passage. Very few bacteria enter the large intestine from the small intestine. However, several hundred varieties of bacteria live in the large intestine. Bacteria in the colon metabolize some of the fiber, releasing methane and hydrogen sulfide gas that gives feces its characteristic odor, and it's also responsible for flatulence. Some bacteria metabolize bilirubin to produce a brown pigment, which gives feces its characteristic color. Bacteria also play very important roles in synthesizing vitamins, such as vitamin K and some B vitamins, which are absorbed across the wall of the large intestine. Most importantly, bacteria take up and utilize most of the nutrients and effectively crowd out potentially pathogenic or disease-causing bacteria. Let's now turn our attention to how residue is propelled through the large intestine. Peristalsis is not an effective way to move residue through the large intestine. Instead, we have these large, powerful contractile waves called mass movements. And these mass movements propel residue several feet at a time. And you felt these mass movements. They occur over large areas of the colon several times a day, typically in response to food entering the stomach or simply to the filling of the large intestine. Increasing the water-soluble fiber content of your diet intensifies these contractions and also softens the stool, making mass movements much more productive. Eventually, mass movements force feces into the rectum. This increases the pressure in the rectum and also causes it to distend, and this initiates the defecation reflex. The process of defecation will involve the rectum. The rectum is the region of final storage of feces by the large intestine. It is connected to the anal canal, and the anal canal simply connects the rectum to the outside world. The actual opening to the outside world at the end of the anal canal is known as the anus. The end of the anal canal has two sphincter muscles. The internal sphincter muscle is smooth muscle and is under involuntary control, and there's an external sphincter muscle composed of skeletal muscle, which of course is under voluntary control. Feces, when forced into the rectum by mass movements, stretches the walls of the rectum, increasing the pressure in the rectum and initiating the defecation reflex. Sensory stimuli are then sent to the sacral region of the spinal cord, which results in the defecation reflex. There is contraction of smooth muscles in the sigmoid colon and the rectum. This further increases the pressure in the rectum and leads to a relaxation of the internal anal sphincter muscles. It is at this point that one has the urge to defecate, and now the brain can make the decision whether or not it is an appropriate time. If it is an appropriate time, then one voluntarily relaxes the external anal sphincter and defecation occurs. If it is not an appropriate time, one simply fails to relax the external anal sphincter. Eventually, within a few seconds or so, the contractions of the sigmoid colon and rectum end, and the defecation reflex ceases. However, upon the next mass movements, the defecation reflex starts again. Diarrhea can occur if residue is rushed through the colon before proper reabsorption of water can occur. This results in feces that is high in water content and difficult to control. What might cause the colon to rush through its residue? Well, irritation of the colon by pathogenic bacteria or toxins produced by the pathogenic bacteria can cause this to occur, such as might happen with food poisoning or the infection of the GI tract by a virus. The high water content of the residue and feces can cause the colon to produce sounds which are audible, and it can also cause spasming of the smooth muscles of the colon. At the opposite end of the spectrum from diarrhea is constipation. Constipation can occur if residue remains in the large intestine too long. This results in excessive absorption of water. This can occur as a result of a diet that is low in fiber. A low-fiber diet may cause mass movements to be less productive, and so it simply takes longer for the residue to move through the large intestine. Poor bowel habits or just failing to heed the defecation reflex can cause feces to be retained in the large intestine for an excessive amount of time. This results in hard feces that are difficult to evacuate from the large intestine. Now let's review the objectives of this screencast. Describe the gross anatomy of the large intestine. Describe the wall of the large intestine. Describe the functions of the large intestine. Describe the role of bacteria in the large intestine. Explain the propulsion of residue through the large intestine. Describe the defecation reflex. And finally, describe diarrhea and constipation. This marks the end of our final screencast on the digestive system. Have a great day.